right. Welcome everyone to the Fletcher Eurasia Program Office. This is one of our lunch seminar series this year by the Fletcher Eurasia Club. I'm Ryland Pitts. I know I've met many of you already, and I'm pleased to be joined and to introduce Dr. Akram Umarov. This discussion is called Regional Integration in Central Asia 2.0, New Crossroads. We will discuss the evolving dynamics of regional cooperation in Central Asia amid shifting geopolitical and economic landscapes. We'll consider new opportunities and challenges for deeper integration, including through trade, security, and infrastructure development, as well as the role of major global players and regional organizations in shaping a more interconnected and resilient Central Asia. I'll keep my introduction for our guest speaker brief to leave more time for discussion and Q&A. But it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Akram Umarov, the first Vice Rector of the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Uzbekistan. He is also affiliated with the Institute for Advanced International Studies in Tashkent and was a Fulbright visiting scholar at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Umarov specializes in security, conflict management, and development studies in Central Asia, Afghanistan, and the former Soviet space at large. He has held research positions at the Institute for Strategic and Regional Studies in the Academy of Public Administration under the President of Uzbekistan. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Akram Umarov.
Thank you. Very long and kind introduction of all my previous career developments. So today, I suppose you don't see very often visitors from Central Asia, so I'll try to bring some more Central Asian vibe to Fletcher School, especially the Center for Russian and Asian Studies. I'll talk about regional integration in Central Asia, and later on I'll explain why I called it exactly New Crossroads. Unless we need, for sure, to go back slightly to the history, to look on how this regional cooperation in general evolved in Central Asia after the independence period in 1990s, early 2000s. It was a very challenging period. So Central Asian countries, saying briefly, established a union, Central Asian Union, back in 1990. So immediately after the collapse of Soviet Union and establishment of new independent state, they quickly understood that actually it's great to be sovereign and independent, but you cannot ignore the long existing economic ties between the countries, which before the collapse of the Union, Soviet Union, very much worked together, and they were acting as a one mechanism in terms of economic development. So you can be independent, but still you cannot ignore all these important economic links. For these specific purposes, I decided to keep some economic ties very closely, and they, in early 1990s, established a Central Asian Union. Later on, again, there were a lot of discussions to what extent it's union, we focus predominantly on economic issues. Then they renamed it, rebranded as Economic Union, emphasizing that it's for purely economic reasons. And it was mostly, first it was Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, then Kyrgyzstan. Later on, after the end of the civil war in Tajikistan, and after in 1999, Tajikistan also became part of this economic organization. Turkmenistan always, from time to time, joined to some gatherings, but also it was not a member of this organization. But quickly, many other disagreements between the regional countries evolved, and this cooperation organization didn't act very well, and it was not efficient to a full extent. And I think there were several reasons for this. First of all, of course, domestic situation, internal stability of the countries were quite challenging. So it was just a period of becoming, they have just become sovereign. There were a lot of internal fragilities in fights within the countries, and they had to focus a lot on resolving domestic issues. So they faced severe economic, political, and social upheaval. So in 1990s until mid 1990s, it was, for example, in Uzbekistan, in my childhood, it was normal to have, this small state-issued receipt, kind of small bills, which you can use to get some dedicated food from the state shops. So you couldn't buy them directly. You had this special kind of bill to get that food. So it was very challenging time. And Uzbekistan introduced its own currency only in 1994, and it became fully working just in 1995. So there were a lot of very important domestic issues which they had to focus on. Tajikistan, as I mentioned, faced a severe civil war, which led to hundreds of thousands of killings and etc. So it all affected the situation in the region. The second, again, that the countries will focus a lot in strengthening their internal stability and building up new statehood. Again, they were for a long time colonies without dedicated public institutions, or the institutions were mostly developed by the Soviet bureaucracy, and they were directly governed from Russia, from Moscow. So there were no kind of established institutions which have emerged locally in this country. So there was a lot of focus on building up these new institutions. And thirdly, of course, there was an increasing distrust among the states. Again, despite all this economic dependencies, there were many border issues, water distribution issues, which emerged a lot of distrust and disagreement between the countries. They couldn't find a necessary compromise on these issues. So it all affected to this bigger regional cooperation and deeper integration idea. Finally, there was, of course, a role of external actors. For example, Russia was not very happy with the development of regional integration, as it perceived it as a challenge to its regional dominance. And in 2004, it became a member of Central Asian Cooperation Organization. At that time, it was the name of this regional institution, and just in 1 year, the organization was fully dissolved. So the rational explanation was, or formal explanation was, we already have the Eurasian Economic Cooperation Organization, which was led by Russia, and we have collective security treaty, we have Commonwealth of Independent States. So it's parallel structure. We actually don't need to repeat the similar functions on a regional level. With this kind of rationale, the organization was dissolved. So, but after 2016 and from 2017, after the change of leadership in Uzbekistan, the new stage of regional integration started, which I call Regional Integration 2.0. And the country, Uzbekistan's foreign policy was significantly changed, and it didn't anymore rely on this isolationist approach, and it focused a lot on engagement, on declaring the region as its strategic priority. And you probably heard about the change of environment in Central Asia, a lot of intensification of political, economic, cultural ties. Maybe I will not focus much more on this, but rather on explanation how this happened and what kind of priorities were behind this change of policy for Uzbekistan. For example, I think first Uzbekistan tried to shift this very securitized approach to its foreign policy. So not to see everything from predominantly security perspective. So it's trying to have a look on some other opportunities which engagement and cooperation can provide. not to perceive, let's say, Tajikistan as there were cases when there was an infiltration of insurgent groups from the territory of Tajikistan to Uzbekistan. So after that, Uzbekistan fully kind of deployed mines on the border with Tajikistan. For example, this was a very securitized thinking and approach to this issue. So if there is a problem, we need to find some security military solution to that. Again, the same with Kyrgyzstan. There were issues with illegal goods transfer through the border from to Kyrgyzstan. Again, it led to deployment of large armed forces on the border areas and trying to completely close down the border. And second, which is second reason behind these changes, so it's very much linked with the first one. In my understanding, Uzbekistan tried to reconceptualize in general regional security, understanding of regional security. So regional security not necessarily just to prevent terroristic attacks, to prevent some armed clashes on the border areas, but regional and national security is more about sustainable development, more about building resilience, more about engagement with immediate neighborhood. So this change in mindset was crucial in the improvement of relations between the Central Asian Council. Actually, even within the previous administration, so during the Karimov's period, in 2012, there was a new foreign policy concept adopted, which also underlined that Central Asia is a priority for Uzbekistan's foreign policy. But in reality, it never happened. Yes, it could be a priority on a paper, but in reality, it was the relationship with neighbors were quite harsh. And third, integration has been seen as a development tool by Uzbekistan. So it's not just, of course, there was a goodwill from Uzbekistan side, but with a specific rationale behind this goodwill. So it was on a stage. Uzbekistan faced severe economic crisis during the late Karimov period. Currency exchange rate was very difficult, so that you couldn't openly, easily make a currency exchange. It was fully controlled. There was a black market of currency exchange. It was so. In general, it very negatively affected on economic situation in the country. And of course, in the new realities, the government understood that without changes, they wouldn't be able to make any improvements in economic situation. So of course, they focused on the immediate neighborhood. So Uzbekistan is in the very center of Central Asia. It has its own advantages and disadvantages. Of course, as located in the very center, you have access to all countries. You have a strategic location, but at the same time, it means you have to have good relationship with all your neighbors. You cannot ignore any of them. All of them are important, especially when you put so high objectives with in terms of economic growth, reaching some sustainable development. It's crucial to have good relationship. This was a reason behind this. I call it kind of zero problems policy towards its neighborhood. So trying to get to the level when we don't have any substantial issues with your direct neighbors. And again, as the country which is highly dependent on these transport corridors, it was crucial to have good relations with neighbors, to have better access to not just their markets, but through these countries to the markets of other close regions. And finally, it's important to have more close and more unified positions within the region while dealing with bigger external actors. So the number of various C5+1 formats increased substantially in the recent years. If before 2016, there were just 3 such platforms with actually four, sorry. The South Korea, Japan were among the first, then European Union, and finally United States established such C5+1 format. But in the recent years, you could see substantial growth of the number of such platforms with Gulf countries, with China, Russia, now even the countries which were quite skeptical on the regional cooperation, like Russia or China, who predominantly dealt with the regional countries on bilateral level, even they introduced such platforms, kind of probably following kind of a new fashion in the region, having such C5+1s. And they have why we cannot have a similar platform and have some fancy meetings from time to time with the regional countries, but still preferring to deal predominantly on a bilateral level, more serious issues. But the fact that even these countries who were quite skeptical on regional cooperation acknowledged and proposed to have such platform, I think is a positive development for the region. And again, we should use this regional cooperation again to develop some regional approach and regional positioning towards various issues on a global arena and also on how to deal with external actors. It would be very helpful. I'm not a big fan of very popular concept of a great game, but again, to avoid any kind of great games, it's in our own hands. We should be strong enough not to be engaged into such games with other external actors. As high-level representatives of United States, we should have a good cards in our hands. For that, we definitely need better cooperation within the region. And finally, what is important in this new policy of Uzbekistan towards regional cooperation, we are not just focusing this, 5 countries, that's it. We should do everything just with 5 countries. This regional cooperation attempts and policy is quite multi-layered. So if we feel that not all things are working well on this 5 countries level, we are trying to be more creative, innovative, establishing kind of bilateral, trilateral formats. For example, on a bilateral level, we signed an alliance agreements with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So it's already agreement. It's not memorandum. In case of Kazakhstan, there is even kind of an article which slightly recalls this NATO Article 5 on joint actions in terms of any foreign interventions or attacks. So it doesn't say directly that we will kind of provide military or whatever support. It says with all means will support in case of some emergency. And for example, there are now emerging trilateral formats, very interesting. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, mostly focusing on energy and connectivity issues. With Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, last year there was a summit in Ashgabat, which focused more on Afghanistan water management issues. So again, for example, for Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan is not that important. For Kazakhstan, of course, in general, as Kazakhstan is now promoting the idea, it's kind of as a middle power. It's many things interesting to the country, but still it's not the priority issue for Kazakhstan's foreign policy. But for the neighboring countries, we have a direct border with Afghanistan. For Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, definitely it's very crucial issue for their foreign policy. And there are soon we will see an Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan meeting in April. It's now planned to be organized on a high level again, which will mostly focus on border issues between the countries, on Fergana Valley, which is quite famous due to its location, dense population, and a lot of things happen in Central Asia and Fergana Valley. So again, very important things are happening in this regard. Besides, there are other regional platforms like Organization of Turkic States, Economic Cooperation Organization, which is Pakistan, Iran. My assistants probably made a small mistake putting here OECD like wrong actually, but somewhere close. Economic Cooperation Organization, maybe it's still good mistake. Potentially, we can grow to the level of OECD. Why not? And also there are the concept which is promoted by Uzbekistan about connectivity between Central and South Asia through Afghanistan. Shanghai Cooperation Organization, despite all its challenges, inefficiency is still there. So this, you can see some layers increasing to outer world. So starting with a core, Central Asia, bilateral, trilateral format, going to 5 countries. Then there are formats where we include to 5, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan formally declared Afghanistan as part of Central Asia. As a scholar, I may have some questions for this, but due to Afghanistan itself, a domestic geography, which is quite divided between north and south, and there is a natural mountains line chain, which, and if you look on a map, directly divides Afghanistan into 2 crucial parts, which I think geographically is a border between South and Central Asia, actually. So these layers of integration is very important. Why there are new crossroads, despite all these positive things, positive challenge developments in the region, still I think there are numerous challenges which we should deal with, which create crossroads to the further enhancement of regional cooperation. So where it will move forward in the near future. First of all, now we reach the stage when we probably need to establish institutions for regional cooperation. For now, it's very light. You know, we have consultative meetings of leaders. Even the names are emphasizing that it's very light level of cooperation. Consultative, nothing serious. We just talk with each other. We just discuss, no decisions made, just exchange of ideas. But now there are discussions. Okay, we already met 7 times in the recent years. A new summits happened. We just skipped in 2021. The 2020, due to the COVID, we had 6 meetings. So what's next? Yes, we can keep meeting each year, or we should think something more comprehensive or more institutionalized. And this here is a tricky thing, because Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan as big promoters of this idea. They're proposing it for a long time to establish regional institutions. Kyrgyzstan is quite aligned with this position, is fine with this, quite happy to support. But there are our friends in Tajikistan and Turkmenistan who have quite a bit cautious position on this. They're saying it's, you know, it can be challenging to their national sovereignty. It can create some additional issues for the independent foreign policy promotion. So they are a bit not skeptical, but cautious. So they prefer to move a bit slow on these issues. For now, as far as I understand, I think we could, in this case, again, it's very tricky considering lessons from 1990s, early 2000. If the bigger countries try to push on this, again, it can create more distrust from smaller countries in Central Asia, which is not our, I mean, Uzbekistan's priority idea. Again, the idea is anyway to make this happen, not to create an unnecessary problems and issues. So probably the interim solution would be to focus in the areas where both Turkmenistan and Tajikistan have high interest. They have high interest, for example, on security issues. Always security is important. Or they have higher interest in connectivity, transport issues, because again, they are also quite interested in being better, get better access to neighboring countries, to other markets, especially in case of Tajikistan, it's quite on a deadlock, so high mountain, and China, Turkmenistan is better located, but still it's neighbored with Afghanistan, Iran, which is also sanctioned. Of course, there is a railway through Iran, but there are issues in using it in a full scale. So probably this will be an interim solution to focus more on this security and connectivity issues. The second crossroad is, again, the regulation, finding compromise on water and energy issues in the region. These are the most sensitive issues. Water distribution and the Central Asia itself is one of the most water stressful regions in the world. And water was one of the polarizing issues before 2016, main problem which created a lot of distrust and issues in the relationship between the regional countries. So the solution in 2017 was, okay, we can keep conversation on water issues, which will create unnecessary mistrust, unnecessary problems in our relationship, or we can, for the time being, focus more on positive things, like trade, cultural exchange, people-to-people connectivity, establishing some regional formats, with the hope that these developments will help us to build up mutual trust, better understanding of each other, and then later on come back to these issues. I think we are approaching to the stage when we need to start this conversation again on water and energy issues. So for the time being, it was on pause. Now we should start thinking again. This is a very tricky issue as it can create an unnecessary problems for general idea of regional cooperation. Next one is again this in general what's happening in the world, creating many problems for us. Geopolitical turmoil, relationship between China, US, Russia, all are important. European Union, and it's quite interesting actually that probably Central Asia now either unique or one of the unique regions in the world where you can still see regional integration attempts, rather than in other parts of the world we are seeing more decentralization. Even European Union having now a lot of infights about kind of to what extent this European institutions should dominate over national institutions, especially on the issues of security and foreign policy. And NAFTA is collapsing in our eyes with imposing tariffs and etc. This is creating so many difficulties in general, to the idea of regional integration. So from this perspective, Central Asia is an interesting case, which is still trying to keep, to develop this regional integration. Or for example, the regional countries, let's say Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, who is now also more engaged in Central Asian affairs, we are now working very hardly to become members of World Trade Organization. While there is a big question about, in general, the future of World Trade Organization, if the biggest countries start imposing tariffs and sanctions against each other without going beyond legal framework of World Trade Organization, so what's rational behind these attempts to become part of this institution? Or Uzbekistan has an idea of being better represented in global institutions like UN institutions, having more representatives in this organization. But again, some countries expressing a huge skepticism about such global institutions and now what will be the future of these institutions. So again, these are creating a lot of uncertainty and challenges, concerns in the region. So probably in this regard, the response would be again to focus still more on regional cooperations because together we would be stronger enough to resist all these challenges from outer world. And finally, probably I would also emphasize that I mentioned the multi-layered structure of this regional integration attempts. We should be still careful with this because overstretching could also create unnecessary problems for the countries, mid-sized countries like Uzbekistan. Of course, it's important to be represented in various places, but probably in some cases we need to focus more on priority things. We cannot do everything at the same time. It requires much higher capacity in this way. So we should, and also not to try to create unnecessary parallels. So trying to create free trade zone both in Turkic states and Central Asian format could be very challenging. So we should try to maybe prioritize. So, okay, in Turkic states, we are working on that, on cultural issues. On regional level, we will focus more on free trade. With case of Central Asia, Caucasus, plus Caucasus, in my personal views, quite perspective concept. So seeing Central Asia very much linked to Caucasus would be very interesting development. Azerbaijan is already very engaged. Georgia is getting more and more partnerships with Central Asian countries. Uzbekistan is now investing in one of Georgian ports to have its own terminals on a Black Sea. So these are important developments in terms of connectivity between the regions. So in general, the key priority, we should find a balanced, perfect mode of regional cooperation, which no one could find until now. But we should do our best in this regard, which is crucial to avoid duplication of functions across different formats. And each platform should serve as a tool for promoting our specific national and regional interests. And we should again learn lessons from both history of regional integration in 1990s, learn lessons from inefficiency of Commonwealth of Independent States, and learn lessons from the current challenges and efficiencies which Shanghai Cooperation Organization is facing. In terms of representation, it's great. In terms of delivering specific outcomes, outputs, it's facing numerous challenges. So I'll stop here. Thank you, and open for any comments.
Thank you for new to Central Asian studies. When Dr. Umarov mentions the Turkic states, he's referring to all of the Central Asian states except for Tajikistan.
Yes.
More connected with Iran. So we'll stop for a short break to enjoy some sandwiches. We'll get to Q&A. You can ruminate on your questions over a delicious sandwich. But just one sort of comment. I love this map. I think Central Asia in general tends to get flattened as a region, and so it's a very dynamic region. You can see the Fergana Valley here, how these countries sort of begin to become a vortex, and there's been so much, as he mentioned, conflict and diversity in that region. And just one note, it's interesting to think about the different regional aspirations or each country's tension between national security and regionalism, or national sovereignty and regionalism. But what's not shown on this map, and which is part of this discussion, is almost equally as important, which is what are the countries surrounding this? You have China here, Russia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then India below, Iran and the Caspian Sea to the west. So I look forward to some questions about what are the prospects for regional integration and cooperation. And in the meantime, let's enjoy some sandwiches. I sort of two questions that are linked, and you can kind of choose how you want to approach it if you want to emphasize one question over the other. But we have these major players, like I referenced just a moment ago: China, Russia, the US, EU, Turkey, India, to lesser extent, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Japan, South Korea, all countries that have in some way engaged Central Asia to varying degrees. And I'm wondering, how do you see their roles complicating or shaping the prospects for a truly regional Central Asia-led integration model? And then relatedly, we've seen and Nargis Kasyamova she writes about this a lot, but multivectoral Kazakh foreign policy. I think other Central Asian states are sort of deciding what does multivectoral foreign policy look like for us, and in a ratcheting up conflict, a cold conflict between the U.S. and China, two countries that have engaged Central Asia in very different ways. China very economically, the U.S. initially in the 2000s very democratically, now more pragmatically. What is the maybe feasibility of a multivectoral foreign policy for Central Asian states?
Thank you. Great questions. First of all, about the diversity of external partners. I think first of course, it's in the hands of the region how to make best of it from this variety of partnerships. For sure, we need more discussions internal in the region in terms of how to coordinate in the best way for the region this relationship. So again, it's very much linked to what I said about this all kind of C5+1 format. So there are 12, I think, as far as I know. Now we have 12 such formats. So again, not to create competitions between the formats, but rather to try to make best of them for the benefits of the region. For this, probably we need to try to prioritize in terms of relations with different countries, what would be the best mutual interest from both sides. It's not easy to do, I understand, or at least to try to identify a couple of areas where we should focus mostly. Again, we cannot do everything at the same time. There definitely should be some specific priorities. Regarding how to deal with this challenges, let's say Russia, US, China, again, it's multi-vector foreign policy. Again, you can call whatever it is. I mean, balance, the multi-vector, and etc. But what is challenging now for this foreign policies? Uzbekistan has very much similar foreign policy, because now the space for maneuver is shrinking. Unfortunately, there is a much more pressure to make a choice on the side. So there is more pressure from this external actors to make a choice. You should be either with us or against us. And what is, in my understanding, is quite concerning now within this situation around Ukraine, war in Ukraine. The current statements from the US administrations seem like they are trying to find a way with Russia to make kind of a new division of spheres of influence, which is quite concerning development for Central Asia. Because if you remember back in 2021, late 2021, Russia published proposed draft agreements with the United States on some this arms and power distribution, where they clearly stated, and there was one paragraph which said that the United States shouldn't deploy any military infrastructure or engage in a security cooperation with kind of regions like Central Asia. Again, maybe in reality we shouldn't kind of try to, again, security issues very sensitive. You cannot have your army with a so diverse military equipment. Again, for the purposes of efficiency, you should make some choices. Using all kinds of equipment could create unnecessary expenditures and etc. But trying to impose this, to make a choice with a document where Central Asia has absolutely no presence and no voice, is a quite concerning development. And we hope that there will not be any more, there will not be similar discussions or agreements. The region will have their agency and voice in such discussions. So we don't want to be in anyone's sphere of influence. We want to keep our sovereignty. We are now very much committed to enhance this regional cooperation in Central Asia. This is our top priority. Again, the response to such developments would be again to improve, to deepen regional cooperation in Central Asia.
Thank you. And any questions from the room?
I have a question kind of also on that topic of balancing the external influences. Obviously, a lot of this conversation has been about kind of the government level, kind of institutions. What role would or could private industry have in, being a positive external factor versus what are some, downsides that you think could, if, influence or private businesses going towards one country and not of other, what tension do you think that could build?
In case of countries like United States or European countries, of course, private sector has a quite important role in identifying priorities of foreign policy, foreign economy, and definitely for having, again, we can have a great relationship on a top level, but if it's not supported by bottom-up developments in between enterprises, between the companies, between non-governmental sector, this kind of relationship can face a lot of challenges in the future, or may not be very stable for in the long-term future. So for this purpose, I think it's crucial to not just focus on this government-to-government relationship, but of course to bring more investors, more companies to cooperate in Central Asia. And for this, I think we need to have some homework done well in terms of increasing investment attractiveness, improving legislation, improving judicial system, which is already on the way. A lot of changes in this direction happening. And there is a lot of creativity. For example, Uzbekistan is thinking of introducing, this English commercial law in its affairs with investors, so, which is not very much in line with our national legislation, but still, as it's crucial to bring investors, why not to be more creative in on this issue?
I think in Kazakhstan, they've already done it.
They already have this center. And there are now discussions to use this model and introduce it in the case of Uzbekistan. But definitely this relationship is quite important. And also Uzbek companies, we don't have a lot of big companies, but few ones. They are trying to be also very well represented, at least in this neighboring regions. For example, there is a company called Artel, which is producing some electric equipment, domestic appliances, and they are now have good market sales in Tajikistan, in Afghanistan, in Azerbaijan. And due to the sanctions, probably in Russia, they're also having some more space and opportunities to explore the market.
So my question is, I guess, asking about the scope of what is possible for regional cooperation in Central Asia. So I totally agree with what you're saying, that we're seeing sort of regional disintegration or just general disintegration.
Deglobalization.
Yeah, deglobalization. Not disintegration, deglobalization, right? It's not as bad. There are some models that still exist for regional integration. I think about the Southern African Development Community. I think about the East African Cooperation Agreement. And these are models that have been put forward where there is generally a sort of like a series of proposals or a series of goals that they're trying to hit over anywhere from a 30 to 50-year time horizon. Usually it starts with the establishment of a customs union, so a common tariff regime, followed by a currency union, adopting a single currency, having a single market. And then some, not all of these regional integration sort of arrangements hint at the idea of a political union. My question to you is in the context of Central Asia, because not all regional cooperation organizations strive for a political union or even strive for a currency union. They just say we're going for a customs union. What do you think is possible for Central Asian cooperation? Where on the spectrum? Is that?
Well, or maybe if I can add to that, what is the vision of Uzbekistan in terms of a regional organization? I mean, we may consider that it's not possible to have something like the European Union, but maybe something like ASEAN, where
Exactly.
there's not as deep a level of integration, would be feasible.
I'll share probably my personal view. I should work a little bit harder to become a Uzbek ambassador. Start sharing more official position. For the time being, let me do a more kind of personal understanding. I think again, as you Arik mentioned, in the region, European model is very fancy and popular. So there are a lot of comparisons, what we are doing right now and what European Union did, let's say, 50, 60 years ago. But I would support Arik in terms of maybe we should focus on less fancy cases like ASEAN, which is quite a working model. Of course, it's not that deep integration as European Union, but it's at least it's working, it's functioning, it's helping the regional countries to find some common positions on trade issues, on connectivity issues, to avoid unnecessary problems in their bilateral relationship. And we had a lot of discussions both in the region, and I have a very good friend from Thailand who actually used to be, is still actually a Thai diplomat who worked in Kazakhstan before. He wrote a very interesting book about comparison between ASEAN and Central Asia. I would recommend to read it. Paradorn, I will share with you link. His name is Paradorn. I cannot recall his last name now, but about ASEAN, Central Asia. But for now, I think we should try to create at least ASEAN-style cooperation mechanism. Then, if it works well and everyone is fine with it, we can start thinking of more deep integration. Or even within European Union, for example, there are smaller regional forms, let's say Nordic Council, or 5 Visegrad countries. In general, I think we shouldn't try to see Europe as a one, unity. Again, we shouldn't try just to prioritize relationship with bigger countries like Germany, France, Italy. But the smaller countries in Europe are now quite active, and they actually, in many cases, they are forming the agenda of European Union. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, being quite small, is quite heavily represented in European institutions, and their voices are quite high in identifying priorities of European Union. Or Eastern European countries, Central European countries are quite important in as an entry point to Central Asia, to in general European Union. I think for Central Asia, it's important to work much closer with this part of the world as well. Uzbekistan, for example, has quite advanced relationship already with Hungary, but it shouldn't be limited just with Hungary. Poland, the Baltic countries, other countries, Balkans also can give a lot of new opportunities. Hungarian companies are very active in Uzbekistan now. The biggest Hungarian bank privatized one of the Uzbek public banks recently and entered the market, OTP Bank.
Right. Can I ask about the issues that faced regional integration 1.0, which was the onset of the Eurasian Economic Union and, of course, the varied memberships of Central Asian countries in the CSTO, I think has persisted. And does that present any kind of problem in terms of regional integration, given Russia's possible concerns? And to add to that, several weeks ago, there was a leak in Financial Times of some kind of memo from the Russian Foreign Ministry about the potential loss of influence in Central Asia. So I wonder if you can comment on that.
I think this, in terms of relationship with Russia and existing formats, of course, if we try to create customs union in Central Asia, it can be a problem. Because again, we have countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, which are already part of economic unions led by Russia. Uzbekistan is kind of not member, but observer in this organization.
Right.
Very kind of good diplomatic maneuvers, in my view. Not to be a full-fledged member, but at the same time have some access to organization, because still these countries are our biggest trade partners, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and you cannot ignore these realities. Potentially, if we decide to get the stage of customs union, it can create issues. But for currently, I don't see a big problem here again, because we haven't reached yet the level of regional free trade zone, not speaking about customs union. There is a free trade zone within the Commonwealth of Independent States, for example, but again, Turkmenistan, for example, is not part of it.
Right.
We should reach to the level when we start. But of course, in general, theoretically, it can create problems if we decide to have regional customs union or within the organization of Turkic states. It can create problems because the countries which are part of now one union, they should make a choice, be part of another one. I mean, to change or to stay.
Or there will be some kind of harmonization process that happens between the two.
Potentially, I mean, theoretically, it can happen, but I think there are a lot of political agenda behind this. To what extent these bigger countries will be fine with such development. We know what is happening now in Ukraine. Actually started with this association agreement with the European Union back in 2014, which had very actually limited economical impact. It could have limited economic impact, but symbolically it was very sensitive issue to other countries.
So a hand here, and then we'll go to Danyar.
Basically about economic development. Sectors in which Uzbekistan has a real competitive advantage. And the second thing about the human capital development in Uzbekistan, like what are the areas in which you think in terms of human capital you guys have like a real economic?
Thank you. Great question. Regarding economic areas where we are more competitive, still our export is mainly resources, but the other areas are getting, they're also catching up with these export numbers. Textile industry is developing quickly. Uzbekistan used to be a big exporter of raw cotton before, but now we're not exporting cotton in general. It's almost fully is now manufactured in Uzbekistan. Tourism sector is flourishing. Uzbekistan has been promoted on various platforms across the world as one of the high touristic destinations and touristic sector in general. Ari can confirm on this.
If you haven't been to Samarkand, Bukhara, Tashkent, highly recommend it. And there's a very good high-speed train that goes from Tashkent to Samarkand. So
Just a quick question about the regional dynamics. It's always said that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are among the two primary engines of economic development. And in my experience, I mean, if there's anyone more anxious about economic development in Uzbekistan, are Kazakhs, because they're or more interested in what's happening. If you ask a typical Kazakh about what's happening in Uzbekistan, he would have a general idea about what's happening. If you ask a general Uzbek what's happening in Kazakhstan, he would have no clue about the primary enterprise. So I think it might be anecdotal evidence, but do you think that, you know, on the general level, population level, the perception in Kazakhstan is not of cooperative nature, but rather to maintain the economic supremacy, if I can say, you know, 5 times more rich per capita, 3 times in aggregate. So what were your experiences dealing with that?
Thank you. In terms of human capital, there is a lot of attention now to education. So Pakistan allowed private universities just recently, 2019, legislation allowed to establish private universities, and quickly, I think almost 80 private universities emerged in recent years. Very quick development. Now, before 2017, we used to have 70 universities. Now we have more than 200.
well, you have to keep in mind, it's a relatively young population and it's what now, 40 million?
38 million.
Yeah.
And annually, we have 1.2 million school graduates.
Yeah.
So, which are seeking for higher education. And in 2016, there were only 9% of them could get some places in higher education institutions. Now, due to this, public universities expanded in the number and private universities emerged. About 40-45% can, in case of their interest, can have places in higher education.
So there's still lots of room to grow.
Indeed, which is opportunity for foreign university to establish some branches. Already more commercially oriented universities like Webster did, and Uzbekistan opened a branch. Now, and another, I'm not sure how the model works, but there is an institution called American University of Technology, which underline says powered by Arizona State University. I don't know what this is powered means. It has some affiliation with Arizona State University. Somehow it is powered.
Not organized, but
Arizona State LNG.
So this is, but also to the school education, to primary education is also trying to change system to make it more flexible. Private, again, schools quickly expanded in the number, so there are a variety of options. But still, public education needs more attention, in my understanding. A lot of things are happening, but it's crucial because we at the universities now, what is facing, we also have to increase the number of student admission, but the level of students, in my personal view as a lecturer, is slightly not catching up with the level, high level.
Anecdotally, I might add that about half of a student's time is spent in the classroom and the other half is spent in private tutoring. So often when I was teaching students, they'd spend their day in the classroom and then they'd spend another 6 hours in private tutoring because the public schools often couldn't teach them what they needed to learn in order to be competitive for the better universities. or foreign study.
Yeah.
And is the private education, was that just for the university level, or is that now, there's,
On
Private
all
school, all
levels,
levels,
starting
okay.
with private kindergartens, private schools, everything private.
And then Daniel had a question.
About the competition between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, I had a similar question even during my talk at the Davis Center today morning. It's very, always emerging question in this kind of discussion about Central Asian cooperation, integration. I hope it is there is envy to each other, but rather than competing with each other. At least we should try, again, the narratives are very important. In Central Asia, symbols, narratives are crucial in building up some specific priorities. At least Uzbekistan is in its foreign policy trying to not emphasize on any kind of competition. I observed myself one of the cases back in 2017, when the first time the idea of having this consultative meetings was proposed by Uzbekistan. It was President of Uzbekistan during the conference in Samarkand. He made a speech, and at the end he said, let's do kind of first consultative meeting. It would be a great kind of gathering to discuss some pressing issues, just to exchange ideas. No statements, no documents signed. I mean, no pressure on making some specific outputs out of it. Just let's create a platform where we can speak more often. And right after him, a Kazakh foreign minister had a speech, and he said, great idea, we fully support. Let's do it in Kazakhstan. If the competition was the case, Uzbekistan could say, okay, actually, it was our initiative. We proposed it. The president proposed it. Let's do it in Uzbekistan. But Uzbekistan tried to be more flexible and said, okay, the idea is to have a conversation. It doesn't matter where. If Kazakhstan would like to be the first host, okay, let's do it in Kazakhstan. So I think we should be less focused on this kind of very symbolic things, because they can create unnecessary tensions. And I think for the time being, it has been working well. Even when in January 2022, there was some issues, instability in Kazakhstan, this Almaty clashes happened. Uzbekistan immediately expressed its full support. Uzbek president called to Mr. Tokayev, said, we are ready to support you, whatever you need. And I think it was quite important to show this kind of support in this challenging situation. Of course, there will be always some kind of competition, but it's a natural between the countries, to neighboring countries to attract again foreign investors, partners. It's fine. But again, even bringing investors, if we start explaining our potential partners that you will get access, just Uzbek market may not be very interesting. Of course, all big countries seek for bigger size market. So if we say there are just 38 million people, it would be better to say you will have access to 80 million people market rather than 30. So it's also kind of homework we should go through, and a change of understanding narratives in our perceptions of the region.
Well, I'll ask a question. Anybody else think of maybe a final round here? But I've been interested to observe how national narratives have been formed in Central Asia, and I think about sort of the central figures of national narratives. So maybe Manas and Kyrgyzstan and Amir Timur in Uzbekistan. There's been a lot of room for narrative building after the fall of the Soviet Union, sort of a reclaiming of national heritages and stories and identities. Do you see that these have a potential to actually divide the region, Or do you think that this is sort of window dressing and domestic politics, but the regional push is very firm?
Recently, I had also a discussion with a few of my colleagues exactly on this topic. They actually propose to work on one joint history textbook for Central Asia. And they asked me, what is my knowledge? I said, very bad idea, unfortunately. Let's not dig into history, because history is full of very sensitive issues. And as soon as we get there, we can create again unnecessary problems for our current relationship. I think for the time being, better focus on what's happening right now, what's happening around us. Work together again to create better opportunities for cooperation with foreign actors, foreign investors. But history, maybe, again, it's like water issues, which I should put it in my slide. Water, border more or less fine, we're almost there, just Kyrgyzstan border, even they signed
signed
an
an agreement,
additional
yeah.
agreement. Soon there will be the final agreement signed. So like water issue is a very sensitive issue. I think the history of the region.
Mhm.
So maybe later on.
Thank you. All right, well, if there are no further questions, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Akram Umarov. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to host you at the Fletcher Eurasia program.